S&P 500 tried to rally. Now we have this little undercut right here after this gravestone. You can see the top end of the range up here around 4,000. Tried to get up there yesterday, only to reject and slice right through this 39.50. Now we're trying to pop our way back over here, but if you take a look, 39.20 held, 3900 held today. Even towards the end of the day when we tried to break here on the 10-minute, we just really couldn't have any follow through. And then towards the end of the day, we just simply reversed back over. If we look at stocks above the 200-day moving average on a percentage basis, we're above that 50 line and we are above the higher high, which gives us a 55 reading. That means the average stock in the S&P is above the 200-day moving average. So where are we seeing the growth? Well, you can see energy right here, XLE. You're kind of wedged in here. We're really not going anywhere despite the China opening. We're seeing it in various fields. For example, XME makes up a small part of the S&P, but we have a higher high here, and we can't really say that about many sectors. Names like Newmont are setting up. You have a little bit of a doji here in a 3-bar pattern. You want to just make sure that we get above the 200-day moving average. I use SMAs. The EMA is already above. I'm not really interested in that. I'm more interested in the smoothing line of exactly where all the players are. So I'm looking and waiting for that, but this sector looked really good today. Another sector in higher highs, we have the XLB, SCCO, FCX. These stocks have just been absolutely monsters since the beginning of the year. As far as other names, you have this AEHR, everybody's watching. But to me, these kinds of names are screaming short covering. I'm not so much sure how much longer this is going to last. Obviously, they were trapped from the earnings. If you look at the earnings date here, not saying they didn't have good earnings, but you don't really see an institutional investor go out there and say, oh, we need to own as much of this as humanly possible, especially in this environment. So these kinds of patterns, they usually will have some kind of pullback. And if you're interested in names like this, you just wait for that kind of pullback. We didn't get it yet, though. I was watching this pretty closely as a potential short, and we cracked the trend line, which you can see very clearly here, and the RSI rolled over, but I never really got that trigger. Really, all I got was that 1 bar down, and then after that bar broke, we never really had follow through. We just kind of had this wonky doji, tried to get back up, and we pushed towards the end of the day. So we're just not there yet. There may be another day or two like this, but there will be some kind of domino effect to the downside. It's just a question of when. Tesla has really been just the gift that keeps on giving. So we just keep doing these gap fills and then rejection. Gap fill and rejection back to these higher highs that we've been mentioning. Comes back down, tries to rally, can't. Provided another great entry for us today. And then we just want to see how we're going to act, right? We're always going to want to watch the previous day higher high and then watch how it acts when it gets to that level. And we can see pretty clearly how we acted and then reversed off of it. So by the time this flipped over there, we were out of the short position. Thought it might do it again by the end of the day. It just really did not. We saw the exact opposite, testing these little peaks. So maybe another test of this 123.29. We're going to have to see what happens at 8:30 on Thursday for CPI. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and click all notifications because we will be going live that day and you're going to want to be notified of it when the CPI hits. It'll be a pretty big day in the market, be the biggest day probably of the month, quite frankly. So it's going to be a huge reading, especially with the expectations into it. So you really just want to watch these key levels. You might even want to screenshot this and use it for later. But we've really been respecting these areas very clean, blatant when you just take a step back and look at it. And for newer traders, I'd really recommend that the very first thing you do is learn how to draw support and resistance line. Netflix was one that just absolutely ripped today. Now, I did not trade this one. They were all over it in the room, but it's not something that I did. Here's your golden cross. Again, I'm going to stress this to the point where you get sick of hearing about them, but you really only will be playing with stocks that are above the 200 and the 55, and primarily, if they don't have a golden cross, just move on to the next one. There's so many that are setting up like this, and they're just outperforming everything else that's out there right now, candidly. So if you take a look at Netflix and how we're acting, this gave some telltale signs. We had a huge volume spike denoted by the arrow right here. And you can see how we tried to rally up over that. Once we were over that 123, there was very little to stop us. If we drill out to this on an hourly and just kind of take a look and go, okay, well, where does that put us? Well, it kind of put us at this doji level right in here. And so you're kind of looking at that and going, okay, well, we're right in here. We're right in that range. And then we flip it on that kind of volume, right? That you take note of things like that. One of the most underutilized tools for people that are doing day trading is just relative volume. You can just see spike after spike after spike, 2-3 times the average daily volume. When you start seeing this over and over and over again, you want to pay attention. And that's exactly what you saw off the open. You had dip buyers all day and they just ran with it. What do you do now? You really need to watch this level and see if we're finally going to get over that 332. And then we could be looking at that 348 level. You have your golden cross here and you are respecting all these trend lines pretty clean. This is beaten down. Usually the first to break, when this was one of the first leaders to break, they're usually the first to rally. So that's how this usually works. Now, I'm not suggesting we're going back to 700, but I am suggesting that since this was one of the first to crack back in November 2021, it is possible that this will be one of the first to start to rally. If you look at it on a weekly basis, you still have a ways to go before you're even at the top of the breakdown. Another theme that was extremely prevalent today, you have the Las Vegas Sands. You can see how all these names are acting. MLCO, WIN, anything that is Macau related is just on absolute fire. Coinbase laying off about 30% of their employees. You can see the rally up. Obviously, this probably leaked. Came in the next day, rallies on the news. This actually presented a really nice short opportunity when it spiked up here today on the way down, obviously. And then towards the end of the day, we closed at the high, which means that they're probably going to squeeze the shorts a little bit here. That's kind of how this is setting up right now. We've had a lot of problems with this 55-day moving average, really not closing above it, only a little bit before just simply rolling right back down. We are above the 22-day moving average for the first time in, I would say, since October 31st. So that might be something that we could look at and see if that has led to any kind of rally before. Handily it has. If we go back and take a look at this in June, we got some nice spikes out of this. So we could be setting up for a short covering rally here in the name. It doesn't change my thesis on it, but that doesn't mean that there's not people that are going to trade in these names on the long side. And JP Morgan's statement yesterday about the amount of people that are short tech right now, that they could see a massive short cover rally. Frankly, I think a lot of people are waiting to see what happens with the Fed. But we are seeing names that are setting up and getting ready to break out. MDGL is one that we have actually in the newsletter, link in description. You see the 282 pivot right off of this number, 1, 2, 3 down. And then you just have that bullish hook right here. And then we just see the lift, retest back. You could use this as a stop actually. And then you're going to see if you're going to get through that 301.12. And then we'll go from there and see what happens. But this close is really what I was looking for, because now we're up in the trade, of course, but now I've got that all-time high close, or I shouldn't say all-time high close, but highest close we've had since this news was announced. And we're seeing constant buying. And these are the kinds of names you're going to want to look at. Catalyst-driven, positive data. This is where you're going to see the money flow. Really wonky day. Here's the NASDAQ. We undercut. This looks almost like a perfect gravestone pattern. We undercut that, and then they just rally us up. Now, what's interesting about this particular pattern, it's been negated. So we broke under it, closed at the high, but you can see that we got back through 50% of the number. So that means that we have a piercing pattern. Now, piercing patterns are actually bullish. We're going to have to see how this plays out tomorrow, but that's a nice looking bar from the standpoint of wicks or price rejection. We filled over 50% of that back in today. And look at the close. This is one of the highest closes that we've had. Now, Thursday is CPI, and I can't say that enough. This can change on a dime. Every single one of the largest moves has been econ, and this will be no different. But I do find it interesting that we closed up here, and it really gets us to this close, December 21st. So this is pretty much the highest close we've had in 3 weeks. Also, if we take a look at this on a weekly, there's nothing really redeeming about it, but I do like the fact that we're unable to close under this October level. We just can't get there. And the past 2 weeks, all we're forming are these dojis. Why that's important is we're closing at the top end of them, and now we made a higher high over them. So it's kind of interesting that we're respecting this level, let's call it 259. Also, I think it's worth noting that if we look at the Russell 2000, holding major support, 173.32. So we are holding going into this CPI number. The CPI number was actually lowered today month over month from 0.1% to 0.0%, which is very interesting that that is happening ahead of the number. To subscribe to the Alpha Chasers community, simply click the link up here in the top right. You will be added to the wait list. Have a great evening and trade to win tomorrow.